All right, so I'm doing my presentation by video because I'm not going to be in class on Tuesday. So I did my paper, my research project on teaching vocabulary, specifically teaching transitional words and phrases in vocabulary, because as an ESL teacher, with all ESL students in my room all the time, vocabulary is one of the most difficult things for my students. Both understanding the word, pronouncing the word, and especially the application of the word, using it in the correct context. I find that they're able to rattle off a list of words, but then when I ask them to use them in context, that's where things tend to break down, is where they're not sure what the word really means or where to use it. So, most of my students come into the country with either very little to no knowledge of the English language. And as we know, it's a very difficult language to learn. It's got all of its different little nuances to it. Words that are spelled differently and mean the same, words that are spelled the same but mean different things. So as we are going forward this year in our writing, I wanted to really introduce the transitional words so that their writing becomes a little bit more fluid, but also at the same time more complicated, so that when I set them loose into their mainstream classes, that they are able to write effectively and to use transitions and different parts of writing in the proper manner. So what I decided to do for my project, for my research project, was to take a look at different ways to teach and to teach the transitional words and phrases, and different ways to make it more accessible to my students and give them more practice in using those words, so when they actually get into a writing project, whether it's with me this year or next year, they're more comfortable using these phrases and words, and that they know what they mean, and again, that they're applying them correctly. So that was the problem that I came up with, that I wanted to explore and see if I could come up with a more effective way to teach it to them. So the purpose of this study, again, is to increase my students' understanding and application of transitional words and phrases in their writing. Because as we know through WIDA and through research, writing is one of the main components of learning a language. We need to write it and write it and write it and see it while we're writing it. So again, the justification for the study is to increase their usage and their understanding and application of the transition words. Now, my research question basically was, will implementing the deliberate strategies and activities in defining transitions, words and phrases, will that increase their ability to use those resources, to use those transitional words and phrases? So, to the study itself, I'm not going to bore you with the paper. I'm not going to read the paper verbatim to you, but to the study itself. So what I did was, like up here you'll see on the screen, I don't know how well you can see it, but up on the screen here, you can see I created a pre-test to give them, to try and see what do they know about transitional words and phrases. Can they pick them out, and can they apply them correctly in context, in context, can they do that? So I gave them this quiz. I would say probably over half of them did not get half of them correct, which tells me that I do have some students who are familiar with it, but I also have some students that are completely unfamiliar with it. And at the same time, it is a multiple choice, so the reliability and validity of it is a little suspect, because it is a multiple choice and they do have a 25% chance of getting the right answer. So I don't really think this is a end-all be-all assessment. I prefer the writing assessment where I actually have to see if they're able to apply them correctly and understand what they mean. So without boring you with everything, I have a few copies of some assignments that I gave just to kind of scaffold what they're doing and how they're working on these things. So the first one is just a worksheet where you probably can't read it, but where it asks them to either define these words, and these are 12 transitional words or phrases that we're studying in class that signal addition when we're writing, so adding something. Either define them or translate them into their own language, because I've found that when they translate them into their own language, it does help because they're able to use their language and English synonymously, so they're able to make those connections between their language and the English language. So that's what they did on the front. On the back, and this one's filled out because it was the key, but on the back you'll see there's 12 sentences here. And I like to include the students in the sentences because it makes it more fun for them. But in each one of these sentences, they had to decide based on the definition or on the translation where they thought each word fit correctly. And I told them that each word only goes in one space, so they couldn't use it more than once, and it did have a specific place where it had to go. After that, they were to attempt to write 5 of their own sentences and choose any of the 5 transitional words or phrases that they wanted to use in those sentences. Now, some of these transitional words and phrases are and, another, then, to, also. So a lot of them understand those. But I did encourage them that if they did think they understood the other ones, a little more difficult ones, further, furthermore, moreover, maybe attempt that. Go ahead and attempt that, because when we fail, we learn. So they did respond well to this. I did go over it with them. So that was something that we've recently done. Now, going forward, they're going to have a project to do, and it's kind of it's a writing project. This is an example of it. It's not a great example, but it is an example nonetheless. And they'll have a rubric with it, so they know exactly what they're shooting for. The goal is. So what it is they get a little animal, they color it, make it their own, and what it is they're writing a story, and the story starts here. And then they'll move from one spot to another and add to the story. The story is that this animal has had to leave its home and move to another place. I chose that because my ESL students have all come from another country and they can relate to that. So it's actually a creative writing story. There are certain elements that they'll have to include in it, such as the animal's name, where does it live, where is it moving, why is it moving, how does it feel about moving there. And then they're able to add their own creativity to the story for the end product. And one of the requirements for this is that they use multiple transitional words and phrases in the story that will prove to me that they understand the context of them and how to use them. Now, throughout this unit with transitional words and phrases, it's going to be weeks long, and we're going to study different groups of transitional words and phrases. There will be multiple assignments and little things we do in class like this or other things, but then there will also be, along the line, different writing assignments, creative writing assignments, persuasive writing assignments, different types of writing, and using the transition, okay? And then also, also they'll be using cause and effect, making predictions, compare and contrast, lots of different elements to those. And then at the end, they'll be given this test again, and this time it will be for a grade, and they will be able to, ideally, they will be able to perform better on this because of the time that we've taken and the different ways that they've been able to practice these transitional words and phrases, and then it will become more real to them, and they will be able to use it in context correctly. So this is what my research was about. That's a small snippet of what I've done. It's not complete, so I don't really have a conclusion. All I have is a hypothesis at this point, and going to have to wait until probably May to see what the result is. Thanks.